You are
This
at
conference
the
will now be recorded.
Habitat Restoration Consortium meeting, in case you didn't know. My name is Jessica Lewis. I am with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. I'm going to be the staff liaison for this committee. I'm relatively new to the Estuary Program, and I'm brand new to the HRC, so y'all should feel free to ask me way too many questions that I can't answer and all that good stuff. But I'm going to turn it over to Jamie and Doug, our co-chairs, to get things moving.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a good couple of presentations. I'm a little biased on, our second one. No offense, Nathan, but so coming at you today, we have Nathan from FDEP. I believe you said you're in the Tallahassee office today.
I am, yep. I'm in the non-point source pollution section, and we're in the Division of Water Restoration Assistance up in Tallahassee, yep.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming all this way.
My pleasure.
So Nathan's going to be discussing today the Green Stormwater Infrastructure website that they've got up and running. And then after that, we will have Mark and Tara from Swiftmud, specifically our swim program here. And they've got some fancy work that we are finally ready to show off to the public. A database and some restoration assessments that we've been working really hard on. And then, of course, we'll have our open discussion and any announcements. And I'll turn it over to Doug if you want to add anything.
No, I just think I think Tom Reese, my colleague, is going to join us for item 4 to talk about some relationships to between publicly funded habitat restoration and mitigation needs for large entities such as port authorities and electric companies. So we don't have anything prepared for that. I think that's going to be an open discussion.
Okay, sounds good. We'll look forward to that. And I think then on that note, Nathan, if you want to go ahead and roll us out.
Awesome, sounds great. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Nathan, and I work in the non-point source pollution program at FDEP within the Division of Water Restoration Assistance. We're up in the main office in Tallahassee, and recently our program has developed a few new GSI resources that I'm going to cover today. And then we also have two main grants that we allocate, which are our 319 grants coming from EPA, the federal government, and then our SWAG grants, which are our state-funded grants. So ready for the next slide? So the first thing I'm going to go over is our new GSI website, our Green Stormwater Infrastructure website. We recently launched this. We've been working on it for a few years, but it went live a few weeks ago. Maybe a month or two now. It's kind of been blending together, but we're really excited to finally have it out to the public and open for use. So green infrastructure, just to provide a little background, is a great option for stormwater treatment, as it provides stormwater treatment at the source, using the natural landscape to mimic and enable Earth's natural processes. So some types of GSI that you might see include rain gardens, bioswales, permeable pavements and pavers, bioretention cells, and tree boxes. And our new website contains several sections that kind of go into different components of GSI. So we have a GSI basic section, we have a resources section, a community engagement section, a success story map, a funding section, and then a contact section. So the website is pretty much our attempt to consolidate Florida-focused GSI resources and put them all together in one place where folks can find them, to kind of make a one-stop shop for green stormwater infrastructure resources in the state of Florida. And the link is gsi.floridadep.gov, and I'll also display that link on a slide later on in the presentation, so that you can check it out that way too. And then ready for the next slide. So the first section that I'll go over is our resources section. This section contains a few different subsections, including a technical resources section, an EPA resources section, a regional GSI/LID manual section, and a community engagement section. So just kind of going over each of those subparts, our technical resources section includes some general, two sections, I'm sorry, a general section and then a design section. So the general section contains green stormwater infrastructure info manuals that have been produced by the University of Florida, as well as a link to our publication tool, which is another resource that we've recently developed. Not quite yet finished, but I'll be going over that in a slide down the road as well. And then we also have a design section in the technical resources section. In that design tab, you can find things like LID planning and design manuals. We have a GSI plant guide that's going to be up there soon, a GSI monitoring tool. And then, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, there's also a maintenance section on there. And then within that, you can find a link to the GIBMP certification course with Florida Friendly Landscaping, a GSI maintenance training with Florida Friendly Landscaping as well, the Healthy Pond certification with UF, and a GSI maintenance manual from UF that's forthcoming from Dr. Eben Bean. So here is really just our attempt to consolidate all those resources on the more technical side of green stormwater infrastructure in one place. So then moving on to the EPA resources that we have up there. We broke that one out into kind of two sections, green stormwater infrastructure and then low impact development resources. So within the GSI section, you can find a link to the EPA GSI website, a really good permitting and enforcement series that they have, GI and LID with 319 federal funds presentation that EPA has put together, and that's also a grant that we fund. And then in the LID section, you can find various documents that EPA puts out. From their Breaking Barriers document, they have one on aesthetics of GSI, encouraging benefits, costs of GSI, maintenance, terminology, etc. And the EPA resources for LID are really good. We use them as handouts a lot when we table. Just some good info in there. And then moving on into our regional section, one that we're still developing here, but we're also open to any suggestions you might have. So within the regional section, we're pretty much including a list of region-specific GSI LID manuals. Florida's geography varies quite a bit from the southern point all the way up north. So kind of an attempt to separate these manuals by region. So users can find manuals in geography that is applicable to where they are. So right now we only have 2 uploaded, but as I mentioned, we're still working on this section. So we have more that are ready to be uploaded, and then we're also super open to collecting more. So if anyone on this call has any that they'd like to suggest we throw up there, we'd be happy to do so. And we're definitely open to all feedback. And then lastly, I'll cover the community engagement resources section. And this one contains our GSI PowerPoint and our GSI brochure. And these are 2 documents that we created with one of our marketing partners, Taproot. So the GSI PowerPoint is basically a presentation that we have created that's intended to be used by local governments or educators to provide an overview on GSI. So maybe if you want to propose a GSI project and aren't really sure how to explain it to some stakeholders or city planners, whoever it might be, it's a pre-made PowerPoint that you can use to kind of go through the GSI basics and some good info in there as well. And then the GSI brochure is a brochure that we intend to be distributed pretty much to the general public by local governments or educators again. And this again just provides an overview of GSI in Florida. So a good thing to use tabling, doing presentations, just want to give the room a general idea of GSI before getting started. And the GSI brochure is now live up there, and I believe the PowerPoint is. Not sure if we officially uploaded it yet, but if not, it will be in the coming days. So so some really good resources up there. And then ready for the next slide. And then now we'll move into the community engagement section. So the community engagement section includes different methods to gain support of folks like municipal staff, elected officials, developers, the business community, and the general public. So these, each section pretty much contains some tips for approaching these different stakeholders. And the tips are designed to kind of help keep each different group of stakeholders' priorities and interests in mind when it comes to GSI. So each section goes into key interests that the stakeholders might have in relation to GSI, such as why GSI would matter to them, how it can help a city, economy, neighborhood, etc. And then there's also some info on costs and performance of GSI relative to those stakeholders. And then this section also contains some tips for just engaging those stakeholders and kind of getting them to the table. A lot of the times that can be a little tricky with GSI just because it's new and it's unfamiliar to some folks. But yeah, this section has some tips that you can use to engage folks who might be a little resistant and get them to the table in the first place. And then ready for the next slide, please. So next, I'll cover our success stories section of the website. Again, another section that we're still working on and are very open to suggestions and any success stories that y'all might have. So our success stories section contains examples of successful GSI projects throughout the state. It contains information for each project, varying from project location, GSI type, summaries, photos, costs and funding information, maintenance info, results, project contacts, and more. So here's a good place to look if you're considering a GSI project, wondering about what potential costs might be, what might work where, and even contacts if anyone wanted to contact the entity that installed that GSI to talk shop with them, get some question and answers going. So a good resource to kind of see what's going on where. And again, our goal is to fill this map up. I know right now we only have around 10 on there, but we're collecting, and then as we keep collecting, we'll keep adding to that map, and hopefully by the end we'll have a nice full map of Florida covered with GSI. So yeah, so we're really eager to add additional projects. And if you have any that might be eligible to be included, or you know of a contractor or someone who's working on GSI who might want to be featured, feel free to send me an email. I'll provide my email at the end of the presentation, and we can get it added to that. And then ready for the next slide. So now I'm going to jump from our GSI website to our publication tool. And the publication tool is in the final stages, not quite officially live yet, but we are doing we're doing testing and looking for feedback. So if anyone's interested in giving it a try after I go over it, I'm happy to help you get set up with an account and get you going in there. So the publication tool is a tool we recently developed, and it's a free tool that municipalities can use to create various types of messaging related to non-point source pollution. So the tool provides easy to edit templates that contain preloaded DEP approved messaging, and then this messaging can be customized to represent municipality needs. And we have messaging available in both Spanish and English. So messaging topics include Florida-friendly landscaping, septic systems, Florida water resources, and of course, stormwater. And our messaging types include door hangers, flyers, palm cards, posters, and social media posts. So essentially, this is a tool that you can go in and use to create different types of publications, literature that can be used to spread awareness to stormwater issues. You can put your city logo on it, your city name on it. You can change up the title. You can't change the pre-approved text just because that's DEP approved. It's gone through our comms department. So it's the language that DEP approves. But other than that, stuff like city name, titles, logos, other than the DEP logo, can be edited to be applicable for your municipality and your needs. And there's a lot of cool stuff in there, and this is another one that we're constantly going to be evolving, so we're super open to feedback. We're going to be adding more publication types. We're going to be adding more topics, more photos. That's another thing I didn't mention. You can go in and select from various different photos. If I had a little more time, we have a demo video I could play. So if anyone's interested in that, I'm happy to share the demo video. And then, yeah, you can go in there, you can choose which photo you want for your publication, how you want to customize it, and you can really create some useful resources there, and it's all free. So a great resource there. And again, the tool isn't fully live yet, but we have opened it up for testing and feedback. So if you'd like to test it, I'll provide my email at the end. You can just send me an email and I'm happy to get you set up there. And then once this tool is officially live, it will be housed under the technical resources section of the GSI website. And there's a page for it there now, but the link isn't clickable yet. So once it's active, we'll make that link clickable and it'll be free to use. And then ready for the next slide. And then now I'll cover some pilot projects that we've been doing related to GSI. So our hopes with this is really to collect some strong data to support GSI projects in the future. GSI is obviously an emerging area, so hard data out there on effectiveness is a little more limited. So that's our attempt with these projects, to just build a nice data set of the effectiveness of different types of GSI. So we've recently funded several GSI pilot projects, and Dr. Evan Bean from the University of Florida, one of our partners, is going to be conducting monitoring to collect that data. So just to go through them really quick, with the city of Pensacola, we have bioretention areas with native plantings. With the city of Hawthorne, we have a treatment train of rain gardens. With the city of Cocoa Beach, we have some bioretention areas with BAM and native plantings as well. With the city of Melbourne, we have an exfiltration landscape boxes with some engineered soil media. And then with Martin County, we have tree boxes with, again, some engineered soil media. And then UF, Dr. Evan Bean will be doing the monitoring for that one. And then ready for the next slide. And now I'll go into some of our funding opportunities. Good timing, we are actually going to be putting out a solicitation for proposals in the coming weeks, maybe two weeks from now. We'll be looking for projects, and then that will be open for around a month. So you'll have around a month to submit funding proposals. We actually just went through and re-edited our proposal form, so it's nice and cleaned up, and should be nice and user-friendly and ready to go. So now I'll just briefly go over the funding opportunities. With our funding, we're always really eager to fund green stormwater infrastructure projects, but we do also fund traditional gray infrastructure. I'd say, hard to estimate, but maybe like 20% of our projects right now are GSI LID. So we do fund a lot of traditional gray projects still. First I'll jump into our 319 projects, which come from the US EPA. They are our federal grant funds. So with these funds, we can fund construction, education, and monitoring. There is a 40% minimum match requirement for 319 funds, and grantees can use state grants and loans towards match. So one thing you can do is apply for both a federal and state grant, and then you can use that state grant as leverage to match the federal grant. And then one thing we like to note is that the 319 grants can take a little bit more time to receive funding compared to our state projects. So it can be anywhere from like a year to 2 years from the time of the proposal sometimes to get the 319 funds. So it's a little bit less shovel ready, if you will. And then some other types of projects eligible for 319 funds include water quality improvements, groundwater protection, water quality restoration, stormwater BMPs, NPS education, and septic to sewer projects. And again, we're always super excited to fund the GSI, but we do a ton of gray infrastructure as well. So we're open to funding all stormwater related, really. And ready for the next slide, please. So now I'll cover our state grants real quick, which we call our SWAG grants. With these, as I mentioned, a bit quicker from time of proposal to allocation of funds. So with these, we typically like to fund construction shovel-ready projects. So match is not required for these, but it definitely helps during our project selection process. So having some match in there can help you get awarded funds, but it's not going to bar you from being awarded funds. And then similarly, monitoring is not required for these projects, but it can really help you in the process while we're going through and selecting which grants we're going to fund. Coming up with data isn't always easy, so we're always excited to see monitoring in there. So some types of projects that are eligible for our state funds include water quality improvements, groundwater protection, water quality restoration, stormwater BMPs, reuse, and of course, green stormwater infrastructure as well. So again, similar to 319, we're funding both GSI and traditional gray infrastructure. So if you have any ideas, we'd be really happy to receive proposals and consider them in our next solicitation. And then should be good for the next slide, please. So in order to apply, our grantees must be local governments, special districts, or public universities. We use one proposal for both of our grants, which I mentioned we just actually kind of revamped a little, so should be a little more user friendly this time around, and yeah, just a little bit easier for the user filling it out. So you can apply for both of these grants, 319 and state SWAG grants at the same time. And as I mentioned, you can leverage that state funding for a federal project. So to do that, you might have to apply different years or different cycles just to have that state funding under your belt if you want to use it as a match. Can't use state match for a state project though. So you can use a state grant to match with federal grant, but you can't match state and state. So you can use the Protecting Florida Together portal to view available grants and apply. And as I mentioned, we will be, as I mentioned, we'll be putting out a solicitation in the coming weeks. So you can contact Emily Fornash. Her email's here on this slide with any questions. She is our program's grant coordinator, and she can help you determine eligible grant components, funding availability, match requirements, and can help with any questions. And she's super knowledgeable on both of our grant types and always happy to help. So she's a good person to call if you have questions, maybe not sure if a project fits with a certain grant. She's your person to talk to and can help you figure all that out. And as I mentioned, we review our proposals twice per year. Occasionally, if we have additional funds, we'll award out of cycle, so it can't hurt to just send a proposal our way. But yeah, in around 2 weeks, we'll probably be releasing our newest solicitation, and that'll be open for around a month. And then again, Protecting Florida Together is a great place to be able to see available grants and to get going on the application, or send Emily an email and she can provide you with some of that info as well. All right, I think I'm ready for the next slide, please. And then here's just some contact info. So we have the non-point source management grants coordinator, which is Emily Fornash. Her email is up there. GSI website specific questions you can send to our general inbox at nonpointsource@floridadep.gov. Same for the publication tool. And then if you have any success story submissions or any just questions about this presentation, anything I covered, feel free to send me an email. My email is up here as well. And then down at the bottom, we have the link to that GSI website that we went through. And that's about all I have for today. So I really appreciate everyone's time and learning about our new GSI website and resources. And again, any questions about grants or anything we went over funding during this presentation, feel free to reach out to Emily or myself, and we'd be happy to help you.
Thanks so much, Nathan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. Jessica, did you want me to read those or? Okay.
Yeah, you or Sheila, either way. Yeah, go for it, Jamie.
So from Will Van Gelder, does total suspended solids, TSS, qualify for water quality improvements?
Yeah, so that's one of the nutrient reductions we ask for in our proposals. So in the proposal sheet, there's a section where you will basically list your estimated load reductions for stuff like TSS, total nitrogen, total phosphorus. It also depends on how the total suspended solids would be removed from the water, but that is definitely a parameter that we consider.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
From Stacy Day, what is a typical SWAG funding amount for projects?
Well, so that can vary pretty drastically. I think the lowest swag amount I have is like $20,000, and then the highest can go up to maybe, I guess it depends how many swag projects we fund in that cycle, but I've seen them upwards of like $500,000. I'd say that's probably the most we've given. Maybe a little more depending on the project if it was a special project, but yeah, I'd say generally from like 20, 50,000 all the way up to $500,000. And again, if it's the right project, it could receive more. I want to say we usually have around 5 million to allocate. And obviously we don't want to just give that all to one project. We want to spread it out a bit. But yeah, we can fund a decently sized project. And again, you can kind of leverage that funding to maybe get a state project, and then say you got 300,000 for the state side of the project, and then you wanted to apply for a federal 319 grant, you could use that state money as match. So that can help.
Thank you, Nathan. It really sounds like there's a lot of opportunities out there.
Oh yeah, there are, and we're super excited with this solicitation we're about to put out. So we're hoping to get some good projects.
Perfect. Looks like we have another one from Doug. What are the major distinctions between a GSI project and a typical wet detention pond?
So again, I'm not the scientist behind all this. We work with Dr. Evan Bean a lot. But pretty much the main difference would be GSI is going to be treating it at the source, whereas often with wet detention, it's piped to that wet detention pond. So the main goal of GSI is to treat the stormwater at the source. So an example I'll give is maybe a bioswale, which you might see on the side of a road, almost like a ditch. And then it would be planted with plantings used to treat the water. So the main difference there is the runoff would slide off the road into that bioswale, whereas with a traditional pond, it would likely be going into a sewer through some pipes down to the pond. So the main difference would be green stormwater infrastructure treating at the source, and then trying to mimic the Earth's natural processes. So trying to use those plants to clean the stormwater, use some bioretention to clean the stormwater. So yeah, I would say the main difference would be treating at the source and really trying to use what the Earth kind of gives us to treat that stormwater. But one person I could say is the true expert. Dr. Evan Bean is awesome. And if you have any questions, I don't know how accessible he is all the time, but I'd be happy to relay some questions to him if you have anything that's super specific. Just because he's our main go-to guy when it comes to the hard science behind GSI, and he's working on some awesome projects like the GSI maintenance document and some other GSI related projects.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I see two more. How does GSI differ from low impact development?
So we use them side by side, but not synonymously. So GSI would stand for Green Stormwater Infrastructure, whereas low impact development is LID. So with the LID, we're pretty much trying to minimize our impact during the construction. So that would be kind of not changing stuff and just kind of leaving it as is for a low impact. So maybe if you're doing construction, that would be leaving a wetland as it was, as opposed to altering it and then adding infrastructure. And then the GSI is actual stormwater infrastructure. So that's stormwater infrastructure that's being installed with the intent to treat the stormwater. And again, the main component of GSI is treating it at the source and kind of using practices that are going to mimic and enable the Earth's natural processes.
Thank you. And one from Jessica Lewis herself. Would you like to ask that on your own?
Sure. I'm wondering, Nathan, we probably have some success stories through the Bay Mini Grant and the Environmental Restoration Fund. I'm wondering, should we just send those to you and you add them? And what's the submission process like?
Yeah. So what I can do is after this presentation, I can send you an email. We have like it's a short little questionnaire that we use pretty much to get like project location, summary, all the info we would need to be able to upload the website. And then from there, we'll review that. And if we need anything else, we can ask for it and get them up onto the map. That sounds awesome though, because yeah, we're really excited to try to collect some more projects and get them up on there.
Yeah, I know we'd also be really interested in testing out the publication tool. So if you want to send us that info too, our comms person would probably be the best person to check it out.
Okay, awesome. Sounds great. I can follow up with both of those after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Similarly, we've got Will from Swiftmud is pointing out that we might have some projects as well. And then Doug is also asking why the west coast of Florida has been left out, probably specifically Tampa Bay. But hopefully it sounds like with the folks online that we'll be able to, get that map pretty dotted up for you. I'm going to go ahead and put my email address in the chat. And, when you email Jessica, if you don't mind, sending those links as well to us, and then hopefully we'll be able to add some projects as well.
Yeah, sounds great. And no bias against the West Coast at all over here. Pretty much that map was based on our initial call for projects. So we pretty much uploaded what we got, and now we're trying to dig a little deeper to fill up the map. So so if you guys can help us fill up the West Coast, we would be super happy about that. That sounds great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll be able to work with you, with the folks on here, and get some great projects on the ground as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with everyone.
Perfect. All right, Doug, did you want to introduce Swiftmud, or should I? Going once.
Sorry, I'm muted. No, I think you know more about this item than I do. I think what we're going to be talking about is an extension or an enhancement of the habitat restoration database that was developed as part of the Habitat Master Plan update. And, ESA did that work. Tom Reese is on the line, did a lot of that work. So we're very interested to hear what the district has done with that information going forward.
All right, well, Mark and Tara, go ahead, take it away for us.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Mark Walton, and I'm joined by Tara Shiro, and we're both environmental scientists with Swiftmud Swim Program. So today we're presenting on the swim restoration site assessments and also our restoration geodatabase. So these are two complementary projects that have been developed to track and manage over 30 years of restoration completed by our program. I'll be focusing mostly today on the methods and results of our condition assessments. We'll also touch how this information is part of a large geodatabase that can be used to guide future project implementation and communication. Next slide, please. So just by way of introduction or refresher, sorry, just my computer froze up a bit here. By way of introduction or refresher, the SWIM program was established by the Florida Swim Act of 1987, and SWIM actually stands for Surface Water Improvement and Management. And the SWFWMD charged water management districts with identifying priority water bodies and implementing plans and projects to improve surface water quality and natural system function in those systems. So although we implement both water quality and natural systems projects, today we're going to be focusing mostly on our restoration projects, which can be either district initiated or cooperatively funded. And next slide, please. So since 1987, SWM's helped restore over 14,000 acres of freshwater, estuarine and upland habitat. Restoration projects can vary from large-scale complex projects, such as the Rock Ponds project shown on the right, through to a plethora of smaller scale projects, often in conjunction with our other partners. Projects can also involve novel or unique restoration techniques, such as natural stream carving used at Barn Boyette, or hydroblasting of spoil mounds at Gateway and Feather Sound. So over 30 years, we've built quite a restoration story. Next slide, please. So habitat restoration requires a lot of learning from the past. And over 30 years, parts of this story have been dispersed through various archive boxes, spreadsheets, and documents. So it hasn't been readily available to inform decisions on new projects, future planning, or even to document program accomplishments. Further, a lot of our older sites hadn't been visited in years, perhaps even decades, so we don't have a great idea of whether the restoration benefits were being sustained or if maintenance was adequate. So these two projects are complementary responses to these issues. The goal of the database was to consolidate and readily query the project data, what was done, where was it done, when, by who, and how much did it cost, and to be able to consistently produce reports, maps, and visualizations from this to inform management. The goal of assessments are to evaluate project success and learnings and feed this into the database. So together, these two projects create an adaptive management framework for continued restoration activities. They also allow us to protect our current district investment by identifying if contractual maintenance obligations have been met and allow us to pursue remedies if they're not. Next slide, please. So for our initial batch of assessments, we visited 81 restoration sites, mostly in the Tampa Bay watershed, but an additional 7 just outside the watershed in Manatee County. So we focused on sites with at least 3 years post-construction maintenance. So at that point, those completed by 2017, and for which we had mapping of the project site boundary and the construction and planting zones within the site. The assessment methodology itself is an adaptation of the Uniform Mitigation Assessment Method, or UMAM, with a qualitative description and scoring across 3 categories: location and landscape support, the water environment, and vegetation and community structure. So we acknowledge that restoration sites may never necessarily transform to pristine habitat. So when we evaluate and score the sites, we do so against the stated restoration goals and expectations of the site. We're aiming eventually to revisit sites every 4 years. So to allow us to reach this target, we've consolidated UMAM attributes and developed a Survey 123 field template, which allows us to facilitate more rapid assessment and ready-to-use data. So when we're doing it, we generally aim to be able to complete at least 2 to 3 sites each day. Next slide, please. So look at the Survey 123 field template. Includes various features that help to simplify, standardize, and speed up data capture. A few highlighted here, such as radio buttons, drop-down menus, and conditional questions. Particularly useful feature for our assessments was being able to embed hyperlinks to various maps and project descriptions and plans. In a lot of cases, it's very difficult to evaluate these older sites without references to what was done and why. Having these links allowed the evaluators to access these materials from the cloud rather than carrying bulky reference materials across all the sites. Next slide, please. Each site, assessors delineated 1 or more scoring zones on the tablet based on different habitats, restoration activities, or what they could reasonably assess from a particular part of the site. Each of these were then assigned a weighting toward the overall site score. Next slide, please. Okay. Each of these scoring areas were nested into the overall site survey and then related in subsequent GIS data. The template also stores photos and photo points, which are related to each of the scoring area. Next slide, please. Once each unit's scored, the template automatically tabulates a weighted site score. The advantage of this setup is that we can compare between sites, but also dig into a particular site and see where in the site's driving good or bad scores. Next slide. All right, so returning to our scoring approach, as I mentioned, we've adopted a similar attribute-based scoring guidance as used in UMAM, with various statements aligning to optimal through to non-functioning conditions. However, we've consolidated these attributes for ease of filling out the field template and for our rapid assessment. Next slide. When assessing the project, we use our project goals as a frame of reference, and we have various places within the template to document what the project goals and activities are. This guides how evaluators consider particular attributes when they're assigning their scores. For a hypothetical example, a wetland with significant cattail growth might be a bigger detractor for a project goal of habitat mosaics or hydrologic connections than it might be for a system targeted towards, say, stormwater pollution. Next slide, please. So digging into some of the attributes that we evaluate, for the water environment, we look at attributes associated with water flow, water level, hydrologic connectivity, sedimentation and erosion, as well as indicators of soil moisture, which may be an indication of whether we have appropriate inundation frequency, visual indicators of water quality, and whether we have appropriate habitat zones along the nearshore gradient. We also look at the condition of any stormwater or water movement infrastructure and whether that's been appropriately maintained. So notice that each attribute has responses ordered from best to worst. So after these attributes have been evaluated and the evaluator are putting a score, it's a visual cue there as to where the score might fall out. But similar to UMAM, the overall score is based on the weight of evidence across these attributes. So there might be some attributes that evaluate them more impactful than others. Next slide, please. Okay, so for vegetation and community structure, we look at cover of native and exotic species, overall vegetation health, and the presence of indicator species. We also note what the dominant native and exotic species are on the site. We look for diversity in species coverage and diversity in age classes and recruitment, as well as the presence of structural habitat elements or topographic features. Next slide, please. So for our location and landscape support, this one's treated a little bit differently in our assessment. This particular category captures connectivity of the site to its surrounding habitat, or conversely, pressures from the surrounding landscape on the utility of that site. Broadly, it considers the size and shape of the area, its surrounds, and what the conditions are at the site boundary. In the first instance, the score is derived from a desktop GIS analysis with land cover classes within a 100-metre buffer assigned a landscape development index score from published sources. We then use an equation that essentially flips that score and scales it consistent with the other categories, such that the 10 is the highest score. Generally, sites surrounded by more natural land cover. Oops, I think you've jumped up. There you go. Generally, sites surrounded by more natural land cover or they're bigger and rounder score higher. Conversely, small, skinny or isolated sites where there's significant edge effects tend to score lower. These scores can also be adjusted in the field based on observed negative inputs to the site, barriers for beneficial flows or species movements, or degradation based on use of the site. Next slide, please. So data published from Survey 123 is automatically available to web maps in ArcGIS Online. So in the web map, we can access pop-up boxes of site information, as well as information for the related parent or child features, so those nested parts of each survey. Next slide, please. Great. Photos that are embedded in the survey can also be viewed from links in the feature pop-up. Next slide, please. So we've furthered our ability to interrogate these field data by adding the web map to a dashboard where we can interact with the data through various filters and dynamic chart and map views. I haven't got a demonstration of that at the moment, but if anyone's interested, we can go through that dashboard at a later date. Next slide, please. We intend to provide GIS data to our cooperators, but we've also developed a basic cooperator report that extracts the overall site condition scores and descriptions, as well as those for the individual scoring zones on the site into a more digestible format with tabular and chart information. And next slide. Okay, and I'm going to hand over to Tara, who's going to go through some of the results of the assessment and some of our observations. So over to you, Tara.
Thank you, Mark. Today I'm going to discuss some of the trends we've seen among the scoring sites and what factors could drive a higher or a lower score. To begin with, we're going to talk about some of the high scoring sites and some of the things that we saw. These higher scoring sites were seen to be maintained as a nature preserve so that the native vegetation could thrive, and recruiting its various stand sizes. With this well-maintained site, the exotic vegetation was very minimal, and the project was fulfilling its water quality and hydrologic goals. Additionally, sites that were surrounded by water or near a larger natural area were seen to have a higher score due to being supported by the surrounding landscape instead of experiencing some of the pressures from highly urban areas. So let's dive into some of the top scoring sites in Tampa Bay. Next slide, please. To begin with, Peanut Lake is a very secluded location. We actually accessed it through the Port of Manatee. Prior to its restoration, it had restricted hydrologic access, and it was completed in 1993, where dredging occurred to create a connection from the lake to Bishop Harbor. This improved water quality, and the site is surrounded by water and lots of other natural areas, so the supporting landscape around it definitely supports this system. The site had good tidal connectivity and flushing, along with diverse native species and hydrologic zonation. Along the littoral edge, we had various types of mangroves, including white, black, and red mangroves, and the site is utilized by a lot of shorebirds and fish. Next slide, please. McKay Bay is another site. It's the dredge hole site. Prior to its restoration in 2013, a feasibility study was done, and this site was seen to have chronically low dissolved oxygen and poor benthic habitats. In the bottom right, you can see the site before it was restored versus now on the left. This site was overrun with exotic vegetation, but now has many community types and planting zones, including salt marshes and mangroves. We didn't expect this area to look as pristine, considering the surrounding areas have impaired water quality due to pressures from both the urbanized landscape and the industrial areas surrounding it. However, the diverse vegetation communities, including the salt marshes and mangroves, are doing very well. And this project scored highly because it's meeting its restoration goals of improving water quality and benthic habitats within McKay Bay and ultimately Tampa Bay. There's recruitment of native vegetation, very few exotics, good flow, and flushing. Next. Robinson Preserve is located in the Palmasola area near Perico Bayou. It's in northwest Bradenton. And prior to its completion, it was full of exotics such as Australian pines and Brazilian peppers. It was completed in 2007, and the preserve now has habitat mosaics consisting of hydric hammocks, coastal uplands, and estuarine salt marshes. There's great species diversity among the vegetation communities, and the native recruitment has various stand sizes, and it's well maintained for invasives. It improves water quality to both Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay, and even with a lot of visitors such as hikers, bikers, and kayaks, the vegetation's thriving and not stressed. And you can see kind of the different types of vegetation we have and the different communities with the uplands in the back of the top right corner. Next slide. Neal Preserve is a little bit farther south towards Anna Maria Sound. It was completed in 2011. It included creation and enhancement of intertidal habitats. It has estuarine marshes, coastal hammocks, and some hydrologic alterations. Neal Preserve provides stormwater polishing to improve water quality, discharging to both Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay. And the site had very few exotics. It was well maintained. The native vegetation is thriving. There's good zonation with a lot of species diversity, a lot of different species out there, and good recruitment of the mangroves as well. With good tidal connectivity and flow and all the habitat mosaics, this project was a high scorer. Next slide, please. Although this is a little farther south in Sarasota Bay, we did want to highlight Cortez, aka Fish Preserve. This project was completed in 2017 to create freshwater and estuarine wetlands along the property's mangrove fringe. Through habitat creations and tidal connections, hydrologic conditions and water quality were improved. This project established natural systems habitats for juvenile fish and wading birds. And we wanted to highlight this one because of the topographic grading out here. It gives a great transitional zone from the mangroves to the salt marshes into the coastal uplands. Very few exotic species were present. The native vegetation is recruiting at various stand sizes, and there's diverse species within each habitat type. Next slide, please. On the flip side, we did have some low scorers, and there were some trends within these. So I wanted to discuss kind of why these scored so low and some of the pressures that are put on them to score so low. So to begin with, some of the small or narrow sites are susceptible to edge effects and disturbances from bordering properties. For instance, invading species, exotic species from neighboring properties, or if a property is within urban settings, then we get both formal and informal use of the site. Delineation of these sites is often hard to distinguish where the management zones are. So oftentimes they're mowed up to the boundary, or there's poor vegetation management outside the project area. Another contributing factor is difficult access. So these smaller sites have poor access, so they're not as easily seen and there's not as much pressure to maintain them, but also they're harder to access since there's not usually a public access for them to be maintained. Next slide. Some other reasons for low scores, of course, maintenance is a big deal. So oftentimes exotic species are present, which impacts our native vegetation succession. Without maintenance, then exotic species take over and hinder the native plant recruitment. Poor recruitment of natives can occur when a site is maintained as a park, as seen in the middle picture. When they mow it frequently, it knocks back some of those native grasses and shrubs that we like to see. Oftentimes, people like to see the wetland or the water, so plants can be cut back or sprayed because it's blocking their view. So that also impacts our native plant recruitment. And sites in urban areas can have pressures such as public access and being improperly used, such as dumping, which you can see in the bottom right, also the homeless living on the site or trash flowing into the site. Next slide. Some other reasons why we had some low scores was erosion is a big deal, especially along these shoreline projects. Erosion can happen for many reasons, and mowing can destabilize plant vegetation. Planted areas that are disturbed cannot maintain or not maintained can lead to scouring and erosion. An improper planting plan where the plants don't uptake as expected can lead to erosion or invasives coming in, which are then sprayed, causing bare areas to be exposed, leading to sediment eroding away. Without plant stabilizing banks or shorelines, the sediment can become trapped in stormwater structures, causing them not to function as designed. Additionally, stormwater structures need to be maintained so that we get these benefits, these water quality benefits that we were hoping for. And as we touched on before, the low surrounding landscape support is a big deal. In the bottom left, you can see the sites on the far right along the edge, but sites in urban areas receive more runoff from impervious areas. They also can get increased stormwater inputs, trash from prevailing winds and currents, but they're under a lot of pressure from the urban areas, so people might be trampling vegetation. So those sites usually get a lower score because they don't have the surrounding landscape to help support them. But I'm going to pass it back to Mark now to discuss our next steps. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, Tara. Okay, so what's next? Moving forward, we're going to continue to develop and refine this assessment to ensure it's useful for site management, both for the district and our cooperators. So as we start to disseminate information, we'll be able to incorporate that feedback. We're going to continue to revisit sites every 4 years and store the information in our restoration geodatabase to see those ongoing site trends. Working with our cooperatives, we'll disseminate this information and use this to inform them of problem areas and help assist with recommendations, whether it be a particular part of a site or a particular issue that needs to be addressed. If need be, we may utilise this to pursue penalties for contractual non-compliance. We're also looking at including ongoing maintenance performance as a consideration to our cooperator past performance evaluations that get done as part of CFI intakes. More positively, there could be opportunity to promote good site managers through our website or media releases or presentations. For use in our district projects, this information can inform future site management and design. It can also inform how we prioritise and evaluate different projects if benefits are found to be difficult to sustain. And that's already a conversation that's starting to happen around some of our shoreline projects, given how many of them were not realising those benefits. We may also incorporate condition assessments into future corridor planning and regional prioritisation identified in our swim plans or in things like the Habitat Master Plan as well. Next slide, please. All right, so the information that's come out of this swim restoration assessments is one part of a larger swim restoration geodatabase. So this also includes project mapping, including point mapping, and as well as the boundaries of our restoration areas and the habitats and planting areas within those, as well as information from our financial system, such as cost, funding, and benefit information, the actual design and as-built plans, information from our information from contracts in our PMO office. Next slide, please. Cool. So all these attributes and features have been painstakingly standardized and linked into a geodatabase schema, complete with cardinality rules and all that stuff to enable efficient database querying. Next slide, please. So the fruit of this labour is we now have web maps and applications that make the database information easy to access and leverage through various filters, charts, and other web app widgets to customise data and reports. So this provides a powerful planning and communication tool for both district staff and executive, as well as for external outreach. And it's an ongoing process where we're constantly looking to fill in any gaps we have in our current project knowledge and work with others to get that information out there. Next slide, please. Okay, and with that we're close to questions, but leave you with a look back in time to SWM's first completed project, the Hendry Delta Restoration, which was completed in 1989. And a big thanks to our partners in both these projects, Brown and Caldwell, who helped us with the site assessments, and Quantum, now MV5, who were instrumental in putting together the geodatabase. And as we look back in time, a big shout out to the great swimmers of the past and other restoration practitioners that have helped to make these projects possible. And with that, does anyone have any questions?
Hi, this is Randy Runnels. I had a question about phases of more recent phases of the original restoration projects. I know with the Peanut Lake project, about 15 or 20 years ago, we went in and they left the road in there, and it was the access road, and it was basically cutting off flushing sheet flow to Salterns. And also Alan Burdett and I went in and designed a project where they took out the road and and box cut it and let the mangrove slump in and make a mangrove channel. But I don't, was that captured, or projects like that, the follow-ups and the later stages, are those captured in the database?
I guess it depended on what we have for our project mapping. we assessed it within the bounds of what that project was in terms of its narrative in our system and what the project plans were. If there were future sort of additions to that, it may or may not have been captured. So for Peanut Lake, that one was essentially looking at whether the water quality benefits were being realised through the flushing. It was originally a sort of dredging to open up that connection to Bishop Harbour, and that was the main focus of our assessment.
Okay.
I see Brant down the corner waving his hand around, so you may have something to input there.
You're muted.
Brant,
Still can't hear you. I can't seem to hear you now. If you type it, we can read it for you.
I think that was a yes.
Okay.
Jamie, I think there were some other questions in the chat too.
Yeah, I'm going up to the top here. Okay, so while we're waiting for Brant's, we'll just scroll through. Doug, it looks like you had a couple. One is, did you assess the recruitment and establishment of benthic invertebrate communities and the habitat restoration sites that were assessed?
Again, it depends on whether that was a particular, I guess, goal of that project. It's generally, that may not generally be a goal for swim projects. Generally we're more looking at the establishment of the plant communities and the water quality benefits.
Okay, thank you, Mark. From Tom Reese, using UMAM scores can be somewhat subjective, et cetera. What's the difference between a 6 and a 7 for hydrology, water, environment? And how did you assign scores uniformly with multiple evaluators? He's saying it's not a major concern, just wondering how this may have been addressed.
Yeah, and that was a really big thing when we were sort of setting this up. We had one evaluator that actually went through all of those 81 sites from Brown and Caldwell, and then she had other staff kind of come in and out with her. We went out, district staff actually went out on a lot of the sites as well, so we're able to kind of calibrate what different scores should be. And we also did a pilot phase as well with everyone to work out what does a 10 look like, what does a 9 look like, and so forth. So, but yeah, it is definitely something that needs to, I guess, be kept in mind, that we're scoring each site using the same yardstick. The other important things is we really emphasize comments within these as well. So there's several spots both within the categories, within the overall score for the individual sites, and then at the overall site level where quite detailed comments are put in. So it's really about marrying up what the qualitative descriptions are versus what those scores are.
Thank you. Another from Doug. Do you have any global conclusions regarding the overall success and failures of district habitat restoration projects? Lessons learned?
Yeah, we do. So generally, most of the sites perform in sort of in that good, sort of category. There's a few exceptionals, quite a few that are sort of at that good kind of 7 sort of range, and then there's a few others that are performing below standard, but not all that many, to be fair. So in terms of global conclusions, I think what really stood out is those sites that are showcase sites do really well. They have a plan of management. People care about them. They go and see them and they expect them to be maintained. They expect exotic species to be treated, and it really shows out. And oftentimes, even if there's significant use pressure for somewhere like Robinson Preserve, for example, it's a gem. Whereas some of the other sites that are kind of locked away, they, even if people aren't using them, they're also not being maintained. There's not that filter on them. So that was, I guess, a bit of a personal observation in terms of that. But yeah, as Tara said, maintenance is so important. I guess the other thing that really stood out is the impact of these edge effects on things like shoreline restorations. Some of these are really, really narrow. They may only be 10, 20 feet wide, and it's really hard to keep a effective natural system functioning going when you have pressures on the upland side from things like mowing and pressures on the shoreward side from erosion or other factors. So that's, yeah, I guess, big thing is we really need to pay attention to what's happening on the edges of these sites.
Thank you, Mark. All right, and from Brant Henningsen, Randy's project with Alan Burdett was not affiliated with SWIM. The initial Peanut Lake project was a joint effort between FDEP and SWIM. So I'm not sure he's asking a question, maybe he's just clarifying, making a statement there. Okay. Oh, and Tara looks like she was responding to Brant. Yes, we were only assessing district affiliated projects in this effort. So thank you, Tara. Okay, Damon Moore. Just a comment. Love the opportunity this provides to promote good stewardship of these project areas over the long term. These folks doing that work don't often get the credit they deserve.
Yeah.
Pat on the back, Damon. Okay. All right, and that's the end of the questions. I'm not going to bother reading the comments that are in the chat. All right, any last questions for Mark or Tara?
Hey, Jamie, Doug Robeson here. Mark and Tara, nice job. Appreciate the excellent presentation. Maybe Tom will join me in this discussion, but as part of the Habitat Master Plan update, we attempted to review all the records we could get from any cooperator. District was by far the biggest entity with the most number of projects, greatest number of acres, and even still we had problems documenting things like acreages and types of habitat that are restored across different phases of projects. Were they double counted? Were they not double counted? Were they, so there was a lot of accounting issues that we ran into. And I think what you're doing with the geo database is fabulous. I think ultimately what we would like to do for the whole watershed is to try to do the same thing. I don't know if that's ever going to be feasible with the real old DEP projects or the Tampa Bay Watch projects and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of projects, but for what the district has done, I think this geo database is outstanding. And you didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about it, but Mark, could you or Tara talk about how you've been able to sort out what was done on different parcels across different phases, and can we total it by project, or how have you done that?
Yeah, yeah. So that was, I guess, one of that was like problem one when we were conceptualizing this database is these big multi-phase projects. How do we break it out? In some cases, we might map it as one project. In other cases, we might map it as 8 different phases of a project. So we've gone through the point where if it's mapped one way in one particular part of the database, that is the way it's mapped throughout. So now we're moving to the point where some of our big projects like Terracea and Cockroach Bay, they are now 10 different projects, phase 1 through to phase whatever, and we're really digging in to try and see where we can break that information out into those different phases, the different acres, the different costs that went into each of the different phases. And also when we evaluate them, they're evaluated as different phases. They do link together in that they're surrounded by the other phases, so that's part of their sort of landscape support. But yeah, that's really been a priority in getting this database set up, is having that consistent treatment of what is a phase, what is a project. Is it the phase? Is it the whole entity? Not sure if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, thank you. Tom, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you stated that perfectly. We also had a problem with not only duplicates trying to do this database, but what's the difference between enhancement and true restoration, right? And both are important, not trying to say one's different, but we had to make a distinction. So what our criteria was for that, if there was dirt work going on, in other words, changing an upland into a wetland or putting pipes in or anything like that, then that was considered a restoration. If somebody went in and removed some exotics and planted all native stuff, again, good, it's all good, but we threw that in the enhancement category just to separate those out. Whether it's right or wrong, we did that consistently just to break it out to these 2 different databases.
Yeah, and that's we've used categories of that as well. So we categorize all our restoration, and made standardized categories, which we didn't necessarily have before, that go through what are large scale restorations, what's hydrologic restorations, and so forth, right down to what are the upland enhancements. We count all of those in our restoration database. We don't extend to things like land maintenance that happens, through our lands department, but any enhancement, because a lot of our projects are enhancements, particularly the smaller ones, are just simply upland enhancements. But yeah, they're all counted in our database.
Thank you.
So now, Tara, if you wanted to touch in on any of those questions before they close.
I was just going to say that anybody that wants to see the geodatabase or the dashboard, we can definitely do that. But today we were doing the assessments, since that was one of the objectives of the consortium, was assessing and tracking restoration successes. So that's why we didn't touch on it too much today. But if anybody wants to see it offline, we can definitely show it to you and kind of show you how everything's linked together and how much information we have in there.
Yeah, and you might find you get an email from us with any gaps that we actually have in that database. We don't have it all filled out yet. We've come a long way, but there's still a ways to go to get everything filled in.
So just before we totally close out on this agenda item, I don't think there's too many more questions, but I guess Mark and Tara, we know the good ones. You've outlined why some of the bigger, if you call them showcase sites, are successful. Maintenance is big. When people are looking at it and using it, it tends to get the attention it deserves. The ones that get ignored in the backwaters, if they're not maintained, they'll be overrun with exotics. we know those things. I guess my question, a couple questions I have left. One is, are there certain kinds of restoration projects that are just not cost effective, things we just shouldn't be doing anymore? And the second question is, have you seen any indicators of sea level rise, and how should we be designing for that going forward?
Yeah, a couple of good questions. Whether we're at the stage where we would throw out any particular types of project, I don't know. We're still, I guess, we've had one run through. The shoreline projects definitely have been problematic. There's a fairly high, I guess, miss rate on those, and that's a conversation that I guess needs to happen. How is it we don't do them? I'm not sure it is, because they're in some of our urban areas. There's not a lot of other, I guess, good targets for restoration, but there may be a conversation on, can we do them better? Can we incorporate things like buffer zones and different designs into those, so that the project doesn't end at a hard boundary with a non-compatible land use. So that might be a conversation that goes forward. In terms of sea level rise, hard to say. Certainly we were seeing a fair bit of erosion damage, and whether that's sort of reflective of maybe higher intensity hydrologic energy getting into these, wave energy getting into these systems. It's hard to say. It's hard to say whether that is a contributor to those systems.
Also, just one more note, the planting plans is always something important to consider when, looking at sea level rise in these coastal projects, and what might be successful, and grading opportunities and things like that to, predict and see what's the best opportunity here for what plants are going to survive, and things like that. So those are definitely discussions that we're having, and that's why these assessments are so important, to understand, what's working well and what's not, and who's keeping up at their end of the bargain.
Yeah, I think kind of the point I was trying to get at is, have we considered the slope? And a lot of these projects were designed and built, before sea level rise was a popular subject, and before we had pretty good estimates on rates and so forth. But, is there a need to revisit the shoreline slopes so that they will accommodate habitat migration and evolution? Are there some best practices that are indicated by that? And I know that the best practices manual that Tom prepared does talk about that, but I'm wondering if you've seen any places in your evaluation where what was planted got pinched out, or I guess diminished by a rising tide up against a too steep of a slope or a hardened shoreline.
Yeah, I think there is an argument that in some cases the rising tide and the higher I guess wave amplitudes and whatnot sort of getting right up to the top of these systems, and creating the perhaps some force, pulling some of the material back out of the systems. We're seeing exposed geoweb in places. Rocks have been washed out, and certainly the transitional plants have been washed out as well. So yeah, I think there is a need to relook at how these are designed. I think slope, and I think also the trying to have a buffer on the upland side as well, so that the plants aren't being destabilized by what's happening on that upland edge are both things that we should be looking at.
Okay, thanks. Jamie, are we done with this subject? Any other questions?
Yeah, I think unless anybody has any other questions, we can probably wrap up.
Appreciate it.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
thank
great
you so
stuff.
much.
Good stuff. We're at the open-ended agenda item 4, and I think Tom, you indicated you wanted to bring up a subject, so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to talk about is one of the things that the Habitat Restoration Consortium could do. I mean, what we're doing now is good, but one of the ideas I was hoping this group could do is go to what I'm calling the next step. In other words, we got a lot of brain trust, a lot of institutional knowledge, really knowledgeable people on these group, and that's why a lot of these restoration projects are so successful. I mean, it's all adaptive management and trying to be best design possible. But what's missing, in my opinion, is the hippo on the bay, and there's 3 big entities that have continuous large scale wetland impacts, and they're unavoidable, like DOTs, right? They have to widen the roads where they need widening, and that means wetland impacts. And you got 2 districts here, District 1, District 7. And for a while, the district was helping them with their mitigation, but now they're on their own. And so what I was proposing is those 2 entities, and perhaps both ports, they have long scale plans of what's coming up, what they may need for mitigation in the future, and they're going to do it. They're going to eventually get the permit to do what they're doing. They have the consultants, they can do it. And if there's a mitigation bank there, that's where they'll go, and that's where they should go. This is not to circumvent use of mitigation banks, but not all ERP basins have mitigation banks with the right type credits for their impacts. And that's where I think this group can come in, where we could interview the District 7 folks and see what's coming in the next 5 years and say, okay, well, right now, District 7's doing mitigation on their own. They're buying pieces of property and doing mitigation for their needs. And that's good. But if we could help guide them and say, you know what, you can buy property anywhere, you can do this mitigation wherever you want. But we know 2 spots that in your district that are really critical. They're in the Ligahaline portion, or there's some critical piece linkage. And if you did your mitigation in that spot, that'd be good for the overall ecosystem, better than just some haphazard spot that you may pick. And the incentive for them is, I think we can pick spots for them that would not only potentially give them the preservation property to the right adjacent to them, in other words, expand their restoration project, but if they somehow improve the water connectivity, then they get the hydrology improvements. In other words, if they did a project out in an island somewhere, they're going to get so many scores that the regulatory agencies are going to give them. And so, great, that's what they get. But if they put that same project in the right place, they could get slightly higher scores because of the adjacency, the benefits to the neighboring property. And now we're helping direct restoration where these public agencies don't build these things. In other words, we only build on public property, but a DOT can buy property. They could even condemn it. They don't do that very often, but they can do that, and they can get a piece of property and they could restore these jewels and these really important pieces around the bay. And this is not to make it easier or promote or ever use habitat restoration dollars to take care of somebody's mitigation requirements. It is merely to guide them, and maybe it might work on an occasion or 2 where they actually put a project in that benefits, the objectives that this group knows is important for Tampa Bay. And so that's my little intro. I don't want to take too long on this, but I just wanted to get some feedback, and it doesn't have to be now. Something to think, mull over, and let's talk about the pros and cons. And if there is enough pros, maybe we can meet with one of these entities and see where it goes.
Hey, Tom, this is Brandon Johnson. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I think this is a great subject. It's something I've thought about as well. I think you and I may have talked about this informally before as well, but I think it's a great topic, and I think it's really key that we get the regulators involved in this discussion as well, because the concept. I see a lot of value in the concept, and I also see a lot of hurdles, including the rightful preference for on-site mitigation for projects that have impacts, versus something you're suggesting as maybe a separate site but has perhaps elevated ecological value, if you want to kind of categorize it that. So I think it's really important to get to hear some feedback. And I would love to hear what the folks from DEP or Swiftmud think about some of these concepts, but also the idea, besides the on-site mitigation requirements, also you kind of indicated or hinted at the fact of maybe all sites aren't created equal, and what can be done to prioritize, and can that be reflected into a priority of not just habitat types but habitat sites. I think your example of corridors, the idea of not just something along the lines of habitat corridors or wildlife corridors, and increasing connectivity, that's been discussed. And to bring this back to the discussion we just had from Mark about some of the sites that are problematic and how things are scored, even with looking at sea level rise, the idea of sites that might be in urban areas where you're just simply limited in the availability of land, essentially, or areas to restore. How does that priority, or how do those sites get prioritized in a time frame? If you look at constructing a shoreline project or something with an eye towards sea level rise, your immediate planting plan or valuation of that might not look so good, but if your time horizon is expecting a certain sea level rise, you may anticipate that, and then vice versa, what you have initially planted or constructed may be phased out, so your time scale on the quote-unquote success of that project may be shortened, but that doesn't mean it's not adding ecological value in the time frame. So I think all of this is a great discussion. I would love to hear some feedback from some of the regulatory folks.
I'll just add in there, we would not be doing anything that you would right now be doing. In other words, you have to be in the same ERP basin, but some of these ERP basins, especially Tampa Bay, is wide slung. In other words, you can literally be mitigating in Manatee County for something that's in Pasco County. And how is that helping that local area for the loss of wetlands they had? And so these are things that are inherent problems when you try and draw ERP boundaries. But again, I think you'd have to, for the mitigation and for the regulatory side, they'd have to be on board for scoring it for what it can do today. Okay, it's mitigating for impacts that are happening today. Now, they should put a design in that has a gradual slope, so these very habitats that they're restoring or creating have a place to move up slope on their own over time, but they can't be scored for that. And without the regulatory buy-in, we won't get anywhere. So that's a hard thing. The regulatory rules are pretty strict, but all the regulators, all regulatory agencies for Tampa Bay only, EPC, DEP, Swiftmud, and the Corps have agreed, at least 5 years ago, that if there was a historic herbaceous wetland, and since there's no fire in the last 40 years, it's turned into a somewhat forested. You got some willow growing in there and some maple, and the regulatory agencies are making that impacts to that be mitigated as forested. We were saying, let them mitigate as herbaceous, because we have disproportional losses of herbaceous wetlands within the all the ERP basins of Tampa Bay. So there is room in the regulatory rules, and you probably have to revisit with them every 5 years because there's change of staff. But I still think it has some viability, and I think hearing from the regulatory folks would be good. So folks, please just send an email or however we want to do this. Let's put together some people's thoughts, and then if this goes somewhere, we should have a meeting with the regulatory folks before we meet with one of these groups. But I still would like to see where this goes and if it can go anywhere.
Hey, Tom, this is Will Van Gelder. I got to cut out here pretty soon, but I think it's a phenomenal idea. And if we collectively do not make that effort, then nothing's going to happen, and we're going to see a loss of some really opportunities that we really didn't think were opportunities because of the scale at which the DOT mitigation program resides. And I applaud the idea. It may be an opportunity to close some gaps that otherwise we would not be able to do because of the scale, and particularly some of the interest at some of the limitations that we have at the Water Management District as it comes to acquisition and even public sentiment towards the district. So I think it's a phenomenal idea, and I think it's a discussion that should carry forward. I think the estuary program is an appropriate place for promoting that concept and identifying certain tracks that we at one time thought were unobtainable, because this is a type of program that could change that perspective. So any way that we can maybe provide some support to that within the limitations that we have, I would be thrilled to see that move forward.
Hey, this is Doug. Let me just comment on when you recall at the last meeting, we did review and rank a number of objectives for this group. And those objectives that dealt with mitigation did not rank particularly high. I think there was a sentiment that and if you look at our agenda, look at the second page, those are the objectives that we adopted. Now, I like this concept as well, and I think you could argue that identifying and ranking priority restoration sites is what we're talking about here, and then really communicating that to large permit applicants that are going to have major impacts that we know are going to need mitigation, and pushing them towards preferred sites, whether that means they acquire them or they lease them or whatever the mechanisms are. I don't think, we're not getting in the mitigation business here, but we're directing mitigation activities towards areas that we have some consensus among the scientists that these are good sites that really meet the overall objectives of the bay and the watershed. So I guess we're losing some folks. We're running out of time, and we can bring this back up at the next meeting, how we do this. But I don't think it's inconsistent with our charter, I guess is what I'm saying. Any thoughts or comments on that? Hearing none.
I'd be curious to hear what Jessica and Sheila on the line from TBEP. I think I had sent an email, and Doug and Tom, I believe you were part of that, to Maya, asking her opinion, because largely TBEP is leading this consortium. So yeah, I would be curious to hear their thoughts and perspective.
I'm definitely not as qualified as Maya, so I'm not even going to attempt to give you an answer that she would. I do know that the whole point of these subcommittees is to bring in all stakeholders and to understand the needs of how to better pursue overall restoration. So I would not see an issue with doing that. How high of a priority we make it, how much of an emphasis it has within our committee, I think are questions that are important. But I am again going to completely defer to Maya, who couldn't be here today because she's at a conference. So this is perhaps something that we should push to another meeting so that we can have her here with her expertise to perhaps give more insight on that.
Hey, Jessica, can you make a note that we'll carry that over to the August meeting?
Sure.
We probably need to have an internal discussion with Maya, with Jamie and myself to see how we want to deal with that.
I agree. And at that internal discussion, if we want to go ahead and move forward, then definitely at the next meeting, per some of the folks' suggestions, let's be preemptive and make sure, I can invite some of our Swiftmud regulatory folks, and,
Right.
We'll get, somebody from DEP and Army Corps. And then, we'll just look at it maybe as an investigative discussion. And seeing what kind of options even exist, how murky the water is going to be if we, dabble our toes in this. But I think, I think maybe we could, like Doug said, it's maybe when we voted on it, we didn't have Tom's optimistic and lovely description. And sometimes people get very nervous when we start to use the word, mitigation. And I know coming from a government organization, we're pretty much all hands off. But if we approach it delicately, perhaps there is an avenue where then this falls under our main objective of ranking restoration sites, and hey, even better if we can get somebody to fund it for us. So, okay.
Yeah,
Well, go ahead.
There was another, oh, go ahead, Doug, sorry.
I'm sorry, the Habitat Master Plan update has a whole chapter on linking publicly funded habitat restoration with the regulatory mitigation issue. And like you said, Jamie, it's typically there's two different worlds and they don't cross very often. I think, we have been looking at ways to cross-pollinate those worlds a little bit so that both sides benefit. And I think it's maybe now time to get a group discussion on that. So we'll carry that forward to the August meeting.
Okay.
We have the next meeting on August 31st. Any suggestions for topics? Please provide those to Jessica or Jamie or myself. We know we're going to come back on this topic, but we're trying to keep topics that hit our primary objectives and keep those moving forward. So any suggestions on subjects or topics? We want to keep this interesting and stimulating so that you keep coming back and we keep the momentum going. So any ideas will be appreciated.
There was one that Brant threw in the comments there about an update on land acquisition programs, so that's a potential there. But there's still plenty of y'all here and would love to hear from you. Either turn on your mic or throw it in the chat. We would love to know what would be most beneficial to y'all moving forward.
I'll just throw out that I had mentioned at one point we might be able to bring in Kevin Wills from the district and get a presentation for our CFI applications, because the applications will, the district usually starts accepting them accepted in August, and then they'll be due Friday, October 1st usually. And, you know, I think some of you are aware that some of our guidelines and the way we've been reviewing and scoring them have changed. So we can bring in Kevin, so that way if there's folks out there who are interested and have some potential projects coming up, we can go ahead and bring him in and he can walk us through that.
I'll tell you what would be helpful to me, since I'm both new to TBEP and brand new to HRC, is for those that are still here, if you could throw in your chat who you're affiliated with. I see a lot of names that I don't know, so it would really help me to understand the people that are coming to these meetings and what the needs might be there. So if you're still here, just go ahead and throw your agency or your organization or business or whatever into the chat. And still keeping the floor open for future topic ideas too. There were a couple of funding opportunities mentioned today. I'm wondering if others here know about additional opportunities that we might be able to give updates on in the next meeting. Joe Citizen, I like that, Brant. Tom, yep, we can definitely give a legislative update in the future too. Jamie, that's all I wanted to throw out there, so feel free to wrap up as you like or continue with discussion however you want to handle.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. Appreciate your time. And, you know, next time I expect everybody to bring a friend, and also please drink more coffee because, you know, there really wasn't enough discussion here. But yes, thank you all very much. And, you know, as Doug mentioned, please, you know, email us. We're friendly. And, you know, I know a lot of you have great ideas and you've been around the block a couple of times. So please share your thoughts. You know, this is new and evolving, and, you know, we can make this into, I think, whatever we need it to be. So let's get there together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a great day.